Presenting the paper about the average wage differences, the case of Costa Rica and El Salvador of 1963 and 2012. It's our final work of Econometrics. We all are students from El Salvador, Latin America, from UCA, which is known as Centroamerican University, José, Simeón, Cañas. This paper analyzes the influence between the rate of productivity and the ratio of surplus rate, and the ratio of wages between Costa Rica and El Salvador, countries showing different wage level and that are in the same region. It is shown that the ratio of surplus or income distribution in these countries impacts more than the rate of productivity. The impact of the ratio of surplus value is negative. We can also say that half the reason of increasing the ratio of surplus wages will converge, and that this convergence will occur about the year 2035. In some views of the economy, of the criticism economy, we can say that Mandel argues that low wages are not a reflection of the low level of productivity of labor in colonial countries, because there are branches where productivities are similar to that of developed countries, and yet wages of poor countries are about 10% of the ones in developed countries. Productivity is primarily based on the equipment available to the worker and their overall technical and cultural competence and capacity of physical exertion. However, precisely colonialism produces abnormally low level of these three basic elements of productivity. Arguably, the more reasons that the low level of productivity is not the cause but the result of low level of wages than the set of underdevelopment that characterizes the colonial and semi-colonial economy. On his own, Emmanuel says that the work intensity of the average worker in underdeveloped areas is 50 or 60% of the average worker in the industrialized areas, while wages are 30 times lower. Sheikh quotes Emmanuel and uses the term direct productivity to refer to the fact that even with identical mass production workforce or undeveloped country produces less than its own counterpart in an industrialized country, which implicates that in critic economics is rejected the idea that different productivities can explain the differences between wages, because productivities are not as diverse as wages. In his polemic with Emmanuel, Berthelin finds in low productivity and in nature the explanation of low wages in poor countries. Berthelin criticizes Emmanuel's deduction that workers in rich countries are participating in the exploitation of workers in poor countries, and for this the explanation of the low wages of the latter is essential. According to Sheikh, is in the nature and the specific combination of productive forces and relations of production of poor countries under the aegis of global capitalist relations, which constitute the objective basis of poverty in some countries, the dominated countries, and that explain both low wages and unequal exchange that may eventually arise there. No other means to transform this objective basis and therefore eliminate the production relation that obstruct the development of the productive forces. Sheikh, in his work of international trade, emphasizes the enormous differences between conventional economics, which speaks about the relative advantage for lacking labor, a theory of value, and the Marxist theory, which can develop the later the concept. There are countries with different levels of development using the same means of production, but that does not equal work efficiency in the production of goods considered, and not change the fact that wages are socially established. Mendel, Sheikh, and Emmanuel recognize the part of the wage gap between areas with different levels of development are explained by the different productivities, and try to distinguish between difference attributable to the technology used and explained by the degree of condition and production capitalists. However, analyzing productivity is a local productivity at the firm level of branch industry. An acceptable definition for productivity needs to take into account that all the existing economic relationships, this the perspective of the theory of labor value. The interrelationship of costs comes from an individual and social labor process at the same time, both individually owned by a private profit-oriented capital and social needs as a host of other business processes to function. No productivity differences should be manifested as differences in income levels, but productivity cannot be understood locally. Necessarily involves the economy as whole. This is because the wage is set according to social conditions and productivity is true economy and not on a particular branch. In the economic theory of this work, we can start saying that according to Alejandro Valle Baeza, the productivity is with a goods it's made. The productivity with which a good is made is the reciprocal of the value of property. Obviously, if it's a basket of goods, it will be wage and average of the values of those assets will be wage in reasonable amounts of assets considering. In the book Economía Crítica of Master Achilles Montoya, he defines the surplus rate as the ratio of surplus value and capital variable rate. Indicates the rate which capital is valued per degree of exploitation. It also raises the wages as the price of the body labor power, a certain sum of money to be paid to the worker for a specified period of their own work for or units produced by its worker. It's commonly known that low wages serve as magnet for foreign investment. Wage differentials between countries are analyzed from Marxist economists are the result of unequal productivities and difference in the distribution of wealth among employees and capitalists. This expression is delivered in a very direct way to the Marxist labor theory of value. In this theory, a very simple definition of productivity follows. The common conception is that physical productivity is output per worker in a company branch. It seems unuseful, but it seems useful, but it seems insufficient to account for the competitiveness of its firms. If a company saves life work but spends more in material or fixed capital, in the end the result may be counterproductive to their competitiveness. The labor and capital productivities are used by neoclassical because they are easy to calculate, although both are very contrary to neoclassical dogma that there are multiple factors of production. It's clear that the neoclassical concept of labor productivity is very close to Marx's concept, and that the indicator can be used in Marxist analysis involving productivity.
Modeling theory. Our model evaluates between ways based on the rate of productivity and the ratio of goodwill between the countries Costa Rica and El Salvador, which states the wages are function of relative utilities and the rate of relative supply value. The variables we use are relative wage, relative productivities, and relative rate or supply value. Model Econometrics. Applying natural logarithms, model explain in statistics after using learning a statistical data source. Statistical data used were obtained from the database version 4 APWT, where the variables mentioned in the table are structured. Here, wage and workers. Number of employees.
As we can see on this slide, we present the original regression output of our econometric model, where we show the relation of wage between relative rates or surplus value and relative productivity of the country under study, Costa Rica and El Salvador. So the coefficient of the productivity rate is not significant because the T statistic isn't higher than the 2 absolute, but the other coefficients are significant, being higher than the 2 absolute. At the same time, the model as a whole is significant, such as the F statistic is greater than the 4 absolute. Observing the Durbin-Watson, we have a positive autocorrelation. So we conclude that it's necessary to apply logarithm to the model in order to improve the model and make the productivity significant. And the estimators are different than 0 because the pro statistic is 0, so we reject the null hypothesis that says the estimators are 0. On the next slide, we have applied logarithm. All the coefficients are significant because the T statistics are greater than the 2 absolute. At the same time, the model as a whole is significant. We see the F statistic is greater than the 4 absolute and the estimators are different than 0. We also can see that the R square is a little bit higher than the previous regression with that logarithm. Can say in a better way that the wage is explained in a 90% by the relative rate of surplus value and relative productivity rate. And last slide, the R squared was 71%. Also, we have same positive autocorrelation according to the Durbin-Watson. On this slide, we have made the heteroscedasticity test. With this test, we can know if their error variance is constant or equal. So we have homoscedasticity when we apply this test. We got a probable value lower than the 5%. So on the null hypothesis says that there is no heteroscedasticity, we reject this hypothesis and accept the alternative and conclude that exists heteroscedasticity, and we have a problem with the coefficients because they are inefficient. Continuing with the residual diagnostic, we made the autocorrelation test. According to the theory, this term means that there is a correlation of the errors in time or among themselves. The null hypothesis is there is no autocorrelation, and the alternative says the opposite. Exists autocorrelation. On the regression output, the pro value is lower than 5%. So we accept the alternative hypothesis. We have a problem of autocorrelation. This is probably originated by the extrapolation of data that we use in order to know growth rates in 2011-2012. The error follows a trend. This is not scattered. Finally, on these slides, once we apply the normativity test, the null hypothesis is rejected because the probability is less than 5%. As we can see, there is a problem of anormality in the model. This lack of normality may be because the study variables are not normally distributed and the covariance is non-zero. In other words, there is no independence between variables. Therefore, the system of abnormality, the errors are not only correlated but they also distributed in a dependent form.